Today we're going to be installing our AWT custom scales on a Benchmade bug out. The tools you're going to need for this job are a T6 Torx driver, a T10 Torx driver, some blue Loctite, and a small bottle of oil. The first thing you're going to do is grab your T6 Torx driver and you're going to remove the 2 screws holding on the pocket clip. Just going to set that off to the side. And now you're going to go through and remove the 4 screws on either side that hold in the barrel spacers and the liner. All these screws are the same size, so you don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. Now that all those are removed, you're going to take your T10 Torx driver and you're going to remove the pivot screw. Set that off to the side. Now you're going to pull back on the axis lock. You're going to take your Torx driver and you're going to push the pivot pin out the back side. Okay, now with all that removed, you're able to take your 2 scale halves and carefully remove them from the knife. Don't cut yourself and try to keep the blade and the liner assembly all together. Okay, now that you've done that, you're going to remove the 2 barrel spacers from either half of the scale. Now we're going to start assembly with our scales. So you're going to grab 1/2 of the scales. You're going to carefully drop that into place. Now take your barrel spacers and lining up the flat spot on the spacer with the flat spot in the scale, you can drop those in. Next, you're going to take your other half of the scales, place it on this side. Now, we're just going to go through, we're going to reinstall those 8 liner and barrel spacer screws. So what I like to do is just snug these down and back them off a 1/4 turn until we get the pivot pin back in. If you leave these just a little loose, it makes getting the pivot pin installed a lot easier. Now, carefully, just hold everything together, holding the blade in place. Flip it over, we're going to install 4 screws on the other side. Again, all these little small screws are T6 Torx. Now that you have that done, you're gonna hold the knife, flip it over to where you can access this right scale. You're gonna pull back on the axis lock, and using one of your Torx drivers, you're gonna stick it down through the hole where the pivot pin goes, and you're just gonna wiggle it around in a small circle. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to line up all those copper washers and the blade and the liners and the scales. So when you look down through there, it should just be one solid hole. Now grab your pivot pin, and you're going to line up the flat spot on the pivot pin with the flat spot inside the liners. And you're just going to try to wiggle that down through there. There we go. Now that's the trickiest part for most people, is getting that pivot pin in. So if it doesn't go in immediately, you can flip it over to this side. You can take your Torx driver and do the same thing, wiggle around, just try to get all that stuff lined up while you're applying pressure to push the pivot pin in. So now that we have that done, we're going to go ahead and get our pivot screw. And we're going to put 1 drop of blue Loctite on the threads. This is the only screw that we use Loctite on. We found that over time, with you flicking the knife in and out a lot, this can actually loosen up and cause some issues with blade play. So we like to just put just a little bit of Loctite on there. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten that down. We're not going to go all the way tight yet. We'll adjust blade tension in just a moment. Okay, now we're going to go back and we're going to tighten down all of the liner screws and the barrel spacer screws that we installed earlier. Flip the knife over to the other side. Okay. Now that you've got that done, you can install your pocket clip. Now when it comes to the pocket clip, we found it a little easier to install if you'll take a drop of oil and just place in each hole that the pocket clip screws will be going into. This is because when the scales are anodized, the threads down in there can get a little bit tight from the chemicals used in the anodizing process. Now we've got that done. Flip the knife back over. We're going to open it up. And we're just going to take our little oiler and we're going to place 1 drop of oil between the copper washers, the blade, and the liner. Now, holding your scales firmly, you're going to grab the tip of the blade and just wiggle it back and forth, side to side. What this does is it gets all that oil down in between the washers, the blade, the liners, gets everything nice and lubricated. It'll make this next part a little bit easier. Okay, so now that you've got that done, we're going to go through and we're just going to tighten this pivot pin down just a little bit. Now, try to open the knife, wiggle the blade, close the knife. This one's still got just a hair of blade play, so we're going to go ahead and tighten it down just a little bit more. Now when you're adjusting this blade tension, doesn't take much. 1/16 of a turn can make or break having a finely tuned action. Okay, I like how that one is. Yep, so that's all done. So that's how you install the AWT scales on the Benchmade Bugout. If you haven't already, check out our website, order yours today.